I thought infertility was the hardest thing a marriage could survive. Turns out, it wasn't. What truly broke me was a small white box that arrived in the mail, and the note that said, "He should know. I'm glad you're here because I need to tell this one right." It's not the kind of story you can rush through between errands or fold into small talk. It's the kind you sit with, maybe over coffee, and let it sting a little. Back then, our life looked gentle from the outside. We lived in a small town in Ohio, the kind with a single main street and a grocery store that closed early on Sundays. My husband, Michael, was a high school biology teacher. I worked part-time at the library. We were the kind of couple people described as steady. No drama, no gossip. Just the two of us and the quiet hum of a life we thought we were building. Except there was always that missing piece, the one we didn't talk about at barbecues or holidays. The fact that after 6 years of marriage, there was still no baby. Infertility became our silent roommate. It sat at the breakfast table between us, waited in the passenger seat on long drives, crept into bed when the lights went out. We tried every polite term. Trying, planning, hoping. But behind closed doors, it was tears and test strips and the ache of another month gone. I remember once, after yet another doctor visit, I stood in front of the mirror and said, "Maybe we just aren't meant to." Michael wrapped his arms around me and whispered, "We'll keep trying, babe. Science is on our side." And I believed him. He was the science one, after all. Then came the treatments. Hormone shots that left me nauseous, appointments that blurred together, savings that disappeared. It was hard, but at least it was our private battle, something that felt sacred in a painful way. So when we finally had our son, through a clinic in Cleveland, I thought we'd beaten the odds. He was perfect. Tiny fingers, wide eyes, a cry that filled every corner of our house with meaning. We named him Jacob. Michael cried harder than I did that day. And for a while, everything felt healed. We never told anyone about the details. Not the procedures, not the donors, not the nights of quiet despair. All they saw was a happy couple with a beautiful baby boy. And for once, that's exactly what I wanted them to see. Then, about 4 years later, came the package. It arrived on a Thursday. A small cardboard box on our porch with my name on it. Return address none. Just a label from a popular DNA testing company. I thought it was some marketing sample or maybe a wrong delivery. But when I opened it, there was a typed note on plain printer paper. It said, "He should know." Tom. That name, Tom, hit me like a faint echo. Michael's childhood best friend. The one from high school stories and old baseball photos. I'd met him once at our wedding reception, briefly, before he moved out west. We hadn't spoken in years. I stared at the note for a long time, the words "he should know" looping through my mind like a song you don't like but can't stop hearing. Know what? When Michael came home that evening, I mentioned it casually. He was rummaging through the fridge, muttering about a missing bottle of root beer. "Hey," I said, "Tom sent something weird today. Some DNA kit?" He froze for a fraction of a second, then smiled, too fast. "Tom? That guy still around? Probably one of those joke gifts. Don't waste time on it." He changed the subject before I could ask more. And that was the first crack I didn't recognize as a crack. That night, I left the box on the kitchen counter. By morning, it was gone. I asked him about it later and he said, "Oh, I tossed it. We don't need that junk mail cluttering up the counter." His tone was easy, dismissive. But something in me felt off. A subtle tightening like the air before a storm. It wasn't just the missing box. It was the way he called Tom, that guy. He never used to. He used to tell stories about Tom, how they built a tree house together, how they both wanted to be scientists. Now it was like he was erasing him. I brushed it off at first. Infertility had taught me to pick my battles. We'd survived so much already. Why start a fight over something as silly as a DNA kit? But that phrase, "he should know," started to haunt me. Who was he? What was he supposed to know? And why send it to me, not him? A few days later, I checked the trash bin in the garage. No box. No note, nothing. Then I remembered something small. Our email notifications were still linked on the shared laptop. If he'd ordered or registered something online, maybe there was a trace. That's when I saw it. An email buried under newsletters and receipts. It was a shipping confirmation from the DNA testing site, only it wasn't to me. It was from Michael's old friend Tom, sent directly to my husband 2 weeks before the package ever reached our house. I sat there, the cursor blinking beside the words, "Your kit has been shipped." And I knew, whatever this was, it wasn't random. I closed the laptop, trying to steady my breathing. Michael walked in then, holding Jacob, who was giggling over a bowl of cereal. He looked so ordinary, so good. I remember thinking, you can't possibly be hiding something this big. But a voice inside whispered, he's hidden things before. Remember the doctor visits he went to alone? The treatments he said were too complicated for you to worry about? It was faint then, doubt, not yet fear. Still, once you notice the first crack, you start seeing all the others. That night, lying in bed beside him, I stared at the ceiling and wondered what truth could be so heavy that it needed to come by mail, and whether Tom's message was meant to save me or destroy us. Before that package showed up, our lives looked like a postcard from ordinary America. The kind: freshly mowed lawn, kids riding bikes, neighbors waving from driveways. The kind of neighborhood where people still borrow cups of sugar and talk about the weather instead of politics. Every morning, I'd walk Jacob to preschool. He'd carry his little dinosaur backpack and tell me which snack he hoped would be in his lunchbox. I'd nod along, half listening, half admiring the way his hair caught the light. 4 years old, endlessly curious, always asking why the sky changes color or why birds never fall. Then I'd come home to our yellow house with the peeling paint and the porch swing that creaked with every push. I'd make coffee, open the curtains, and let the quiet fill the kitchen. That quiet used to feel peaceful. Later, I'd realize it was the sound of things we didn't say. Michael left early for school each day, usually with a travel mug and a stack of papers under his arm. He loved his students. He said they kept him young. He'd come home with chalk dust on his shirt and funny stories about kids who thought frogs were reptiles. I liked listening. It made our world feel alive again after so many years of silence and trying. Our evenings were simple. Dinner at 6, a little TV after Jacob's bedtime, sometimes grading or library paperwork. Routine was our comfort blanket. After everything we went through to have our son, normal felt sacred, and I won't lie. There was still love there. Maybe not the kind that keeps you up all night, but the kind built from holding each other through hospital corridors and bills we couldn't afford. That kind of love runs deep, even when it starts to change shape. Infertility had carved a permanent space in us. Even after Jacob was born, it left behind a sort of echo. We never really talked about what those treatments did to us, to me especially. I'd lost count of the needles, the hormone swings, the way my body stopped feeling like my own. But whenever doubt crept in, I'd look at Jacob sleeping, his chest rising and falling, and I'd think, it was worth it. Every bit of it was worth it. I'd catch Michael watching him too sometimes, with a look I couldn't quite name. It wasn't sadness exactly, more like distance. Like he was thinking about something far away or someone. "Everything okay?" I'd ask. He'd blink, smile, and say, "Yeah, just tired." I believed him because tired was familiar. That winter, money got tighter. The clinic bills lingered longer than we expected. I picked up more hours at the library, shelving returns after closing time. Sometimes I'd come home to find Michael already asleep, lesson plans still open on the couch. I'd touch his shoulder, just to remind myself he was real, still here. We'd drift through the weeks, busy but connected in the way people are when they've survived something together. Sundays were our family day. Pancakes, cartoons, long drives to nowhere. We'd talk about maybe having another child one day, adoption perhaps. Michael always said, "Let's give it time." I thought he meant financially. Now I think he meant something else entirely. Looking back, I can see the signs, tiny things that made no sense then. The way he always avoided questions about the clinic, or how he flinched when I once joked, "Our donor probably has a PhD with how smart Jacob is." He laughed too quickly, almost forced, then changed the topic. But I brushed it off. You don't question happiness when it's finally here. Sometimes, I'd notice he kept an old photo on his desk, a snapshot of him and his best friend, Tom, both around 17, arms around each other after a baseball game. I asked once, "Do you ever talk to him?" He shrugged. "Nah, he's out west now. Different life." But there was warmth in his voice. Nostalgia, maybe, when he said Tom's name. So when that DNA kit came later, I remembered that warmth, and how quickly he'd buried it. In those days, the future still felt open. We were planning a trip to Florida for summer break. Jacob was finally old enough to remember the ocean. I was excited, even bought a new camera. Life felt light again, or at least I told myself it did. The library had a book club that met on Thursday nights, and sometimes I'd stay late after the meetings, just breathing in the smell of paper and old wood. That library felt like my safe space, quiet, organized, predictable. Every story had an ending, even if it wasn't happy. I didn't know mine was still writing itself behind my back. One night, while folding laundry, I found a receipt in Michael's jeans pocket from a coffee shop 2 towns over. Not unusual, except the date was a weekday morning and the total was for 2 lattes and a pastry. When I asked about it later, he said he'd met a student's parent about a science fair project. His tone was normal, easy. I let it go. But the name printed on the receipt, Tom B., didn't register until much later. At the time, it was just another stray detail in a pile of busy days. That was our normal, quiet, predictable, safe, the kind of safety that makes you stop looking too closely. If you'd asked me then whether I trusted my husband, I'd have said yes without blinking. We'd been through too much to doubt each other. But sometimes trust isn't about truth, it's about survival. You keep believing because you can't bear to reopen old wounds. There was one moment, though, that stuck with me. A small, almost invisible warning. It was late, around midnight. Jacob had a fever, and I went to grab the thermometer from the bathroom. Michael was in the kitchen, phone pressed to his ear, speaking low. He didn't notice me at first. I caught just 3 words. "Not yet, please." When he saw me, he hung up so fast he nearly dropped the phone. "Who was that?" I asked. He smiled that same too fast smile. "One of my students' parents. Their kid's sick, same as Jake." Then he changed the subject, kissed my forehead, told me to get some rest, and because Jacob's fever worried me more, I did. I went back to bed, believing it was nothing. I didn't know it then, but that was the last night our marriage would ever feel normal. Because a few days later, that DNA kit, the one I thought was junk mail, would start unraveling everything we built. For a while, I convinced myself the package meant nothing. Life went on, or at least pretended to. School drop-offs, work, dinners, bedtime stories. But a quiet unease had started humming beneath it all, like the low sound a refrigerator makes. You stop noticing it until the power goes out. After that night with the phone call, Michael grew gentler. Too gentle. He'd kiss my forehead before leaving for work, text me through the day, even bring home flowers for no reason. At first I liked it. Who doesn't want a little tenderness after years of exhaustion? But it felt practiced, like a man rehearsing calm. One evening I asked, "Everything okay at school?" He nodded too fast. "Just busy season, grading." He wasn't lying, not exactly, but something about the way his eyes darted away told me the truth was somewhere else. A week later, I opened the closet to grab Jacob's old baby blanket, the one I kept wrapped in tissue on the top shelf. Behind it was another box, plain brown, tucked far back. When I pulled it out, dust sprinkled onto my hands. Inside was an opened envelope from that same DNA testing company. Only this time it was addressed to Michael A. Carter, not me. My heart started pounding in that deep, hollow way it does when your body knows before your brain does. The letter inside was short. "Your results are ready. Access your profile online," and beneath it a printout. A family tree chart. One name glowed on the paper like it was lit from underneath. Jacob Carter. Parent match. 0% for a second, the room tilted. I thought maybe it was an error, or I'd read it wrong. Or maybe parent meant something else in genetic language. But I knew enough from the years of fertility treatments to recognize what I was looking at. 0% wasn't a typo. I sat down on the floor, the closet door pressing into my shoulder. All those years of shots, clinics, tears, he'd told me we'd used a donor embryo that matched my egg and his sperm. He said the clinic had confirmed it. He said our son was ours. I stayed there for maybe half an hour, staring at that number. 0. Then I put everything back, exactly where it was. I didn't want him to know I'd seen it. Not yet. I needed to understand what it meant before I opened that door. That night at dinner, he talked about his students again, laughing like nothing had changed. I nodded, smiled, served meatloaf, kept my voice even. But inside, every sound felt sharper. The scrape of the fork, the hum of the light, the rhythm of Jacob's little feet kicking under the table. After bedtime, I told myself to ask him outright. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I said, "Hey, do you ever miss Tom?" He froze just slightly, then laughed. "Tom? That guy's ancient history." Then he kissed my cheek, told me not to worry so much. That night while he slept, I opened the laptop again. His email was still signed in. I searched the word DNA. The screen filled with threads. Dozens of messages between him and Tom from over a year ago. The earliest one stopped my breath. From Tom B. To Michael Carter. I can't stop thinking about Jacob. We should talk. And then another. 2 weeks later. He deserves to know the truth. I scrolled, heart pounding. Pieces started forming a picture I didn't want to see. Lines like, "The clinic said anonymity was guaranteed. You promised this would stay between us. If you don't tell her, I will." By the time I reached the last message, just one line. Time-stamped 6 weeks before the package arrived. I was shaking. "If you won't tell her, maybe a DNA kit will." That was the moment I knew. The secret wasn't about a random donor. It was about who the donor had been. I closed the laptop, heart hammering so hard I felt it in my throat. Tom. Michael's best friend since childhood. The boy in the baseball photo? The man who sent that kit. I couldn't decide which betrayal hurt more. The lie itself, or the fact that he'd let me carry guilt all those years for being the broken one. For days, I walked around in a daze. At work, I'd shelve books and forget where they went. At home, I'd catch myself staring at Jacob, searching his little face for pieces of truth. Did he have Michael's smile? Tom's eyes, mine? Every resemblance became a riddle. I kept waiting for Michael to say something, anything. But he never did. He acted too normal. And that fake calm made me feel like I was losing my mind. One night, I decided to test him. We were watching a rerun of some sitcom. I said casually, "Do you ever wonder if those DNA test things actually work?" He stiffened. Just for a beat. Then laughed. "You know me, I teach biology. Half those things are gimmicks." I smiled, pretending to agree. But inside I knew he'd just confirmed it. He knew exactly how well they worked. That was the beginning of the end of pretending. The beginning of quiet observations. Little things that once felt harmless now flashing like alarms. He started taking more phone calls outside. He'd say, "Just a colleague," and step into the yard. He began leaving early for school, saying he wanted to prep labs. But sometimes he'd come home smelling faintly of a cologne he didn't own. Not another woman's perfume. No, this was something different. A man's. It didn't make sense yet, but my gut told me everything was connected. I couldn't ask him, not yet. If I confronted him without proof, he'd twist it, make me doubt myself. He'd done that before. During fertility treatments, when I'd ask for details and he'd say, "You don't need to stress about the science stuff." So I decided to find my own proof. I ordered a new DNA kit, this time under Jacob's name, with my email. It arrived a week later. I waited until Michael was out grading papers on campus. Then I swabbed the inside of Jacob's cheek, sealed the envelope, and drove straight to the post office. I remember my hands trembling as I dropped it into the mailbox. The sound of that envelope sliding down the metal chute was like a door closing behind me. Whatever came next, there'd be no going back. The following weeks crawled. Every email notification made my stomach flip. I barely slept. Michael noticed, asked if I was okay. I lied, said work was stressful. He believed me or pretended to. Sometimes I'd catch him watching me, like he was waiting for something. Then one evening, as I tucked Jacob into bed, he asked the simplest question. "Mommy, how come my eyes are green and yours are brown?" My throat tightened. I said, "Eyes can surprise us sometimes." He giggled and said, "Like magic?" I smiled, but inside something broke. A few days later, the results email finally arrived. Subject line, "Your child's DNA results are ready." I clicked it before I could breathe. And there it was, staring back in cold scientific numbers. Parent match, mother, 99.9%. Parent match, father, 0%. My whole body went cold. Even when you think you're prepared, seeing it in print makes the floor disappear. In that moment, everything, our marriage, our son's story, my own sense of reality, hung suspended in a single question that burned through me. If Michael isn't Jacob's father, then who is? I already suspected the answer. But suspicion and confirmation are two very different kinds of pain. I closed the laptop, slid down the wall, and whispered to the empty room, "I know, Michael. I finally know." The night I opened that email, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table long after the house went silent, watching the cursor blink on the screen beside that number. 0%. 0. A void where a bond should have been. It felt like someone had cut through the invisible thread that connected our family, and now I was just floating, untethered. I kept hearing echoes of our past, Michael's calm voice during our IVF consultations, the way he'd squeeze my hand and say, "Whatever happens, we'll face it together." Together. The word felt cruel now. He'd known. All along, he'd known. By dawn, the first light was creeping through the blinds, painting thin gold lines across the table. I was still sitting there, still in my robe, when the front door opened. He'd gone for his usual morning jog. "Hey," he said, surprised. "You're up early." I forced a small smile. Couldn't sleep. He poured himself a glass of water, completely unaware of the earthquake that had already split my world in half. That day, I decided not to confront him. Not yet. Instead, I needed answers, real ones, because part of me still wanted to believe there was some other explanation. That maybe the clinic had mixed up samples, that maybe Tom had nothing to do with this. But the way Tom's name kept echoing through my thoughts, I knew that wasn't wishful thinking. It was instinct. I found his number buried deep in my phone from years ago, before our lives drifted apart. I stared at it for almost an hour before pressing call. It rang 3 times before a cautious voice answered. "Hello? Tom? It's Emma." Silence. Then a breath. "I was wondering when you'd call." That one sentence told me everything. He knew. "Why did you send the kit?" I asked. My voice was shaking, but I kept it steady enough. He exhaled. "Because he wasn't going to tell you." "Tell me what?" "That Jacob. He's mine." My stomach twisted. The words didn't even sound real. Like I was hearing someone else's life unravel. He kept talking, quietly, almost remorseful. "You remember when you and Michael were going through treatments? When you said the clinic couldn't retrieve viable embryos that matched both of you?" He panicked, Emma. "He didn't want to lose you. He begged me to help. Said it would stay between us, that you'd never have to know." I couldn't breathe. "You agreed to that?" I whispered. "I thought I was helping," he said. "I thought he told me you both consented. That it was your idea." That last sentence was the knife. Michael had used my name. Used my trust to forge a lie. I hung up before I could hear another word. Then I sat on the kitchen floor, shaking. Tears rolling down without sound. All those nights of injections, the physical pain. The guilt that my body couldn't give him a child. And he'd already had the solution lined up, hidden behind my back. A child, yes, but not ours. By afternoon, the numbness started to harden into something sharper. I replayed every small moment that hadn't made sense. The way Michael never wanted to talk about the donor. How he refused to let me read the clinic paperwork. He'd always said, "Too many details will just stress you out." And I'd believed him, because love is blind, but trust is deaf and dumb when it wants to be. When he came home that evening, I watched him. The way he smiled at Jacob, the way he said, "Hey, buddy," and kissed his forehead. It wasn't an act. I knew he loved that boy. But love built on a lie is still a lie. After Jacob fell asleep, I poured myself a glass of wine. Then another. When I finally spoke, my voice was too calm to sound like mine. "Michael, can I ask you something?" He looked up from his papers. "Sure. Who's Jacob's biological father? He froze, didn't blink, didn't even breathe for a second. Then came the faintest tremor in his voice. What are you talking about? I think you know, I said. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. He finally whispered, Did Tom call you? I didn't answer. I just stared at him. His shoulders slumped, and for the first time in years, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. He didn't deny it. Didn't fight. He just said softly, I was trying to protect us. Protect us from what? I snapped. The truth? He rubbed his face, sighing. You wanted a child so badly, Emma. You were breaking inside. The clinic said the odds were almost zero. I thought if I told you the donor was someone you knew, someone close, you'd never agree. But if it worked, if you held that baby, it wouldn't matter anymore. I stared at him, stunned by the twisted logic. You decided what I could handle, I said quietly. You decided what kind of mother I'd be, what kind of truth I could live with. He didn't argue. He just sat there, silent, tears in his eyes. And I realized something awful. He truly believed what he did was mercy. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and Jacob's soft breathing through the baby monitor. Then I asked the question I'd been dreading. Did you ever think about what that secret would do to him? To Jacob? Michael looked down. He's my son, he said. No matter what biology says. And I almost believed him because he said it with such conviction. But conviction doesn't erase deception. That night, I slept in the guest room. I told him I needed space. He didn't argue. The next morning, I packed Jacob's lunch, drove him to school, and then parked the car by the lake where we used to go after our IVF appointments. Back then, the lake had been a place of hope. We'd sit there dreaming about the child we'd have one day. Now it felt like a graveyard of old promises. I called my sister, told her everything. There was a long pause on the line, then she said, Emma, this isn't just betrayal. It's violation. The word hit me hard. Violation. Because it wasn't just the lie. It was how my body, my marriage, my motherhood had been rewritten without my consent. Over the next week, the house became quiet in a way that didn't feel peaceful. Michael tried to talk, to explain, to justify. But every time he opened his mouth, I saw the chain of lies stretching back years. Every conversation we'd had about Jacob's first steps, his first words, all of it layered over a foundation that wasn't real. And yet, the hardest part wasn't anger. It was grief. Grief for the version of my life I thought I had. Grief for the woman who'd once believed her husband completely. A few days later, Tom sent another message. Just one line. For what it's worth, I never wanted this. I just wanted him to be honest. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. That night I sat by Jacob's bed watching him sleep. He looked so peaceful, so innocent, the only one untouched by the storm. And in that moment, I knew I had to protect him, even if it meant destroying what was left of our marriage. I kissed his forehead and whispered, You are loved no matter where you came from. Then I walked out, closed the door behind me, and leaned against the wall. Tears came, but they weren't desperate this time. They were cleansing. Because beneath the grief, something new was starting to take shape. A kind of quiet strength. A voice that said, You can survive this. You already have. And that was the first night I let myself imagine a future that didn't include Michael. The days after the truth came out felt like walking through fog. Everything looked the same coffee mug, the same porch light, the same child's laughter echoing down the hallway. But nothing was the same. The foundation of my life had cracked, and I was still pretending to stand on it. Michael tried to carry on. We were just taking space. He made breakfast for Jacob every morning, packed his school bag, kissed him goodbye. Then he'd look at me, those quiet, searching glances, hoping I'd say something. I didn't. I wasn't ready to give him the fight he wanted. He expected yelling, maybe tears, maybe a grand meltdown that would let him play the repentant husband, but I wasn't going to give him that release. Silence was my power now. Instead, I started to gather information. It was almost instinctive. That slow, deliberate kind of focus that comes when grief turns into survival. I dug through old medical folders, the clinic paperwork, old email exchanges. Most of them were routine, but one form caught my attention: the donor consent document. My signature was there, but something about it looked off. Not the shape of the letters, but the timestamp. It was dated 2 weeks before I'd ever seen that document. I stared at it for a long time. My stomach turned cold. He hadn't just lied. He'd forged my signature. That was the moment my sadness began to shift into anger. Clean, bright, purposeful anger. I made a copy of every relevant paper, every email, every record that showed the timeline. Then I locked them away in a folder, tucked deep inside my work bag. Not because I was ready to take legal action, not yet, but because I finally understood that I couldn't trust him to tell the truth again. And beneath all that documentation, I started planning something quieter, something just for me. My exit. I began saving small amounts from my freelance work, shifting money into a separate account under my name. It wasn't much, but it was something. Every deposit was a small declaration of independence. A whispered promise to myself, "You're not trapped." Michael noticed the distance. He'd say, "Emma, please, we can get through this. We can go to therapy." But his words rolled off me like water off glass. I'd nod, smile politely, then go back to whatever I was doing. Inside, though, I was rewriting my entire life. Piece by piece, I was taking it back. One evening, while folding laundry, I caught Jacob humming to himself in the living room. He was building a tower out of his wooden blocks, and I heard him say quietly, "Dad says I build like Uncle Tom." My heart clenched. He didn't know, of course. To him, Tom was just the funny man from old pictures, a name that showed up on birthday cards once a year. But it made me realize something. The truth would find its way to him eventually. And when it did, I wanted to be the one to tell him. Not Michael. Not Tom. Me. That night, after Jacob went to bed, I sat outside on the porch. The air was cool, crickets buzzing somewhere in the yard. I thought about the years we'd spent chasing parenthood. The injections, the crying in bathroom stalls, the whispered prayers. How much of that journey was mine, and how much of it had been built on manipulation. And then I thought about Jacob's smile, that pure, easy joy that came from me, from the mother who'd carried him, held him, loved him every day since. He might share someone else's DNA, but he was still my heartbeat walking around outside my body. So, I made a decision. I would not let this lie define me or him. I would not let Michael's fear turn me bitter, but I would hold him accountable. I started documenting everything, not out of spite, but for protection. Notes about conversations, copies of texts, screenshots. I wasn't sure what path I'd take yet, whether divorce or separation or something else, but I knew this. Whatever came next, I'd face it with clarity. One evening, when Jacob was at my sister's for a sleepover, Michael and I sat down to dinner. It was quiet, awkward, heavy. Halfway through the meal, he said softly, "I miss you." I didn't look up. "I'm right here," I said. He frowned. "No, you're not. You've shut me out." I finally looked at him. "I didn't shut you out, Michael. You locked me out years ago when you made that choice." He stared down at his plate. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I added, "You didn't just betray me. You betrayed our son. You decided for both of us what kind of life we'd live." He reached across the table. "I did it because I love you." I pulled my hand back. "You did it because you wanted control." He didn't speak after that. The silence between us felt final this time, not angry, just empty. When I went to bed that night, I realized something strange. I didn't feel afraid anymore. I'd spent so many years walking on eggshells, around his moods, his worries, his pride. But once you've survived a truth like this, fear loses its grip. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Not to file anything, just to ask questions. The woman on the other end was calm, kind. She said, "You've got options. But more importantly, you've got time. Don't rush. Get your ducks in a row." That was exactly what I needed to hear. Over the next week, I started seeing a therapist. Not because I was falling apart, because I wanted to rebuild right. She helped me name what had happened: reproductive coercion. It sounded clinical, but it fit. She said, "Emma, this wasn't just deceit. It was a violation of consent. You get to grieve that." Hearing those words, "You get to grieve," unlocked something. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to cry without guilt. Not for the marriage, not for the man, but for the woman who'd been silenced by someone she trusted. Therapy also helped me think about Jacob's future. How to explain the truth when the time came. How to help him grow up with pride instead of shame. Meanwhile, Michael seemed to be shrinking into himself. He stopped jogging, stopped smiling. Some nights I'd hear him crying in the bathroom, and though part of me pitied him, another part thought, "Good. Maybe now you understand what you took from me." Still, I wasn't cruel. I let him see Jacob every day. I made sure our routine stayed stable. Because this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about freedom from pretending, freedom from guilt that was never mine. By the end of that month, I had a plan. I'd talk to him one last time, lay everything out, tell him that after the holidays, I'd be filing for divorce. I rehearsed the words in my head, again and again. But deep down, I knew the real confrontation wouldn't be about papers or custody or money. It would be about truth, about finally speaking it aloud, without fear, without anger, just clarity. And when that moment came, I wanted to be ready. The morning I chose to confront him, the sky was heavy and gray. The kind of gray that looks like the world itself is holding its breath. I remember thinking maybe it's fitting, because I was holding mine too. Jacob was spending the weekend with my sister. I'd planned it that way. I wanted the house quiet, neutral ground, no distractions, no excuses. When Michael walked in that Saturday afternoon, he looked tired, unshaven, shoulders slumped, eyes rimmed red. He said softly, "Where's Jacob?" "With my sister," I answered. He nodded. He knew. I gestured to the table. "I made coffee," I said. We sat across from each other like strangers about to negotiate a peace treaty after a long, silent war. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the slow ticking of the kitchen clock. I looked at him, really looked, and realized how far apart we'd drifted. The man sitting before me wasn't the same person who once kissed the back of my neck and whispered dreams of fatherhood. That man was gone. And in his place was someone I didn't quite recognize. "Michael," I began. "I need to say this once, and I need you to let me finish." He nodded, eyes cautious. I took a deep breath. "You didn't just lie to me. You took something sacred and twisted it into something you could control. You used my pain, my desperation to be a mother, and you weaponized it. You decided for me, for us, and you've been living off that lie for years." He started to speak, but I raised a hand. "No, you've had years to talk. This is my turn." His jaw clenched. I continued. "You took away my right to choose. You took away my trust. And you made a child, an innocent child, part of your deceit. Do you have any idea what that means? What it will mean when he grows up?" He swallowed hard, eyes shining. "I didn't want to lose you," he whispered. I laughed, a small, bitter sound. "You lost me the day you decided to play God." I reached into my folder and laid out the documents, the forged consent form, the email timestamps, everything. He stared at them, his face draining of color. "I've spoken to a lawyer," I said. "I know exactly what happened. You falsified my consent. You lied to the clinic. And you hid the truth about our son's conception. You didn't protect me, Michael. You manipulated me." He buried his face in his hands. "Emma, please." But I didn't let him finish. "You don't get to please me anymore." The silence that followed was suffocating. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. Then, finally, he lifted his head and said, almost in a whisper, "So what now?" "You're going to ruin me?" I leaned back in my chair, calm. "No, Michael. You did that yourself. I'm just done protecting you from the consequences." I told him that after the holidays I'd be filing for divorce, that we'd figure out custody arrangements for Jacob, that I'd be informing the fertility clinic about the forged documents. He stared at me, stunned. "You'd destroy our family like that?" I looked him dead in the eye. "You already did. I'm just acknowledging it. For a moment, he looked like he might argue. But then something broke inside him. He slumped forward, elbows on the table, hands covering his face. I could hear his breath hitching, the sound of a man who finally realizes the gravity of what he's done. But I didn't comfort him. I'd spent years carrying his guilt for him. That burden wasn't mine anymore. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he whispered. I stood up, my voice steady. "You didn't mean to, but you did. And intentions don't erase consequences." He didn't follow me when I walked to the door. Didn't call my name, didn't beg. Maybe he finally understood there was nothing left to save. I went upstairs and started packing a small bag. Just the essentials for a few nights at my sister's. I heard the faint creak of the floorboards downstairs, the sound of him moving through the house like a ghost. When I came back down, he was sitting on the couch, staring at a framed photo of the three of us at the lake. Jacob on his shoulders, both of them smiling. He turned the photo over, face down. "I'm sorry," he said softly, and for the first time I believed he meant it. But it was too late. I walked out the front door without another word. The wind was cold, sharp against my cheeks. When I reached my car, my hands were trembling, not from fear, but from release. As I drove to my sister's, the gray sky finally opened up, rain hitting the windshield in soft, rhythmic taps. It felt almost symbolic, like the world was washing something clean. That night, in her guest room, I lay awake listening to the rain. I thought about all the ways I'd been silenced, by shame, by fear, by loyalty. And now there was only one voice left. Mine. The next morning, I sent 2 emails. One to my lawyer, confirming I was ready to move forward. And one to Tom. It said only, "He knows. Please stay away. This is my story now." I never got a reply, and I didn't need one. That chapter was closed. Over the next few days, Michael tried to reach out. Texts, missed calls, one long email begging me to reconsider. I didn't answer. Every time my phone buzzed, I reminded myself, silence is a boundary too. Then, on the 3rd day, I came home briefly to grab Jacob's favorite stuffed bear. Michael was there, sitting on the floor in the living room, surrounded by photo albums. He looked up at me, eyes hollow. "Jacob's not here," I said quietly. He nodded. "I know." Then he added, "I'll sign whatever you need me to. I won't fight you." It was strange. That moment didn't feel like triumph. It felt like closure. The kind that's quiet and sad and necessary. Before I left, he said one more thing. "Tell him I love him, please. Don't let him think I didn't." I nodded. "I'll tell him," and then I walked out. This time, I didn't look back. The confrontation didn't end with shouting or broken dishes. It ended with truth. And that's the thing about truth. It doesn't explode. It just settles. It fills the room like light after a storm, revealing everything that's been hiding in the dark. As I drove back to my sister's that evening, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. And freedom, after years of lies, feels like breathing for the first time. The weeks after the confrontation passed like soft echoes. Quiet mornings, steady routines, small steps toward a life that finally belonged to me again. I moved into a small rental house not far from Jacob's school. Nothing fancy, but it had sunlight in the kitchen and a big oak tree out front that reminded me of the one from my childhood yard. That tree became a kind of symbol to me, rooted, still standing, even after storms. Jacob adjusted better than I expected. Children have this miraculous way of normalizing what adults complicate. He'd ask sometimes, "Is Daddy coming over today?" And I'd say, "Not today, sweetheart. But you'll see him soon." Then we'd go back to coloring or reading, and his little world would stay safe and intact. I kept my promise. I didn't poison him against Michael. Whatever else happened, Michael was still his father in the ways that mattered. The man who'd rocked him to sleep, taught him how to ride a bike, bandaged his knees. That truth didn't need to be erased. But it didn't need to control me anymore either. A few weeks later, I met with my lawyer again. The paperwork was clean, straightforward. No fighting, no hidden clauses. Michael had signed everything: property division, joint custody, child support, with almost mechanical precision. When I asked my lawyer if that was normal, she said, sometimes guilt gets things moving faster than bitterness ever could. I didn't disagree. The fertility clinic called me soon after. They'd opened an internal investigation. Apparently, this kind of thing had happened before, rare but not unheard of. When they apologized, their tone was professional, clinical. But I wasn't angry anymore. I just told them, do better for the next woman. Make sure her consent means something. They promised they would. Therapy became a rhythm for me. 1 hour a week where I could unpack the layers that still felt tangled. There were still days I'd wake up with that heaviness in my chest, remembering how blind I'd been. But then I'd make breakfast, braid Jacob's hair, pack his lunch, and realize that my life hadn't ended. It had just changed shape. One Sunday morning, Jacob and I went for a walk around the lake. The same lake where Michael and I had once sat and dreamed about the family we'd have. Jacob ran ahead, laughing, tossing small rocks into the water. And for the first time in months, I let myself smile, really smile, watching him. He turned back and shouted, "Mom, watch how far I can throw." I said, "I'm watching, baby." Always watching, and I meant it. That night, after he was asleep, I sat on the porch and looked up at the stars. It struck me how quiet everything was. Not the uneasy quiet of secrets, but the peaceful kind that comes after truth has done its work. It's not loud or dramatic. It's just steady, like breathing after holding your breath for too long. Michael and I started a new rhythm, co-parenting through texts, polite exchanges at drop-offs. He'd show up with Jacob's favorite cereal or a new toy, trying too hard, but I didn't stop him. It wasn't my place to fix his guilt. It was his to carry now. Every now and then, he'd say something small that showed me he was trying to understand. "I've started therapy too," or "I'm trying to be better for him." And that was enough. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It just meant I was done bleeding. The hardest part wasn't rebuilding the logistics. It was relearning trust, not in people but in myself. For years, I'd second-guessed every instinct, every decision. Now, I was practicing something new, believing my own voice again. One afternoon, my sister asked, "Do you think you'll ever date again?" I laughed. "Maybe, but right now I'm dating peace." She smiled. Good choice, and it was. Peace doesn't show up with flowers or promises. It just sits quietly beside you while you make your morning coffee, reminding you that you're okay. A few months later, I got an unexpected letter in the mail from Tom. No return address, just my name written in his careful handwriting. Inside was a short note. "I know silence might be best, but I need to say this. I never should have agreed to what he asked. I'll live with that forever. I hope you and Jacob find every bit of happiness you deserve." I didn't write back. Forgiveness doesn't always require conversation. Sometimes it's just letting go of the weight of being angry. That night, I tucked the letter into a drawer, not as a keepsake, but as a reminder, the truth had set all of us free, in different ways. Time passed quietly after that. I started a new freelance contract that paid better. Jacob began kindergarten, and I threw myself into helping with class projects, volunteering at the book fair, making new friends. Simple things that felt big again. One day, while cleaning, I found an old photo album, the one Michael had been looking through the day I left. For a moment, I hesitated, then sat down and flipped through it. There were pictures of our wedding, our first house, baby Jacob wrapped in a hospital blanket. Each image held a ghost of what used to be. But instead of pain, I felt gratitude, because those memories were real in their own way. I had loved deeply, tried honestly, and given everything I could. That was mine to keep. Toward the end of the album, there was a picture I'd forgotten about. Me, pregnant, sitting on that lake bench, the sunlight falling just right across my face. I stared at it for a long time. I looked strong, peaceful, hopeful, and that's when I realized something. I didn't lose everything. I just shed what wasn't real. The life I had now, this quieter, simpler, truer life, was built on something solid. Truth. Not perfection, not fantasy, just truth. That realization became the closure I'd been waiting for. Not a dramatic ending, not a grand act of justice, just the quiet dignity of a woman who survived deception and still chose love. Love for herself. Love for her son. Love for the truth, however hard it was to face. The following weekend, Jacob and I planted a small tree in the yard, a little sapling that would one day give shade to whoever came after us. As we patted the soil down, Jacob looked up at me and said, "Mom, will it grow big like the one at Grandma's?" I smiled. "Yes, baby. It just needs time and care." He grinned. "Like us?" I nodded. "Exactly like us." That night, as I watched him sleep, I whispered a quiet thank you. Not to anyone in particular, just to the world for giving me another chance to start over. For showing me that healing doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, "You're safe now." And I believed it. It's strange how life can break you open and still make you softer, not harder. I used to think strength meant holding everything together, pretending I wasn't hurting. Now I know strength is letting go of lies, of guilt, of the version of myself that lived to keep other people comfortable. There are moments, even now when I wake up and the first few seconds feel weightless, I forget everything that happened. Then it all rushes back. But it doesn't crush me anymore, it just reminds me that I survived. I look around at my little house. The drawings Jacob tapes to the fridge, the soft clutter of real life, mismatched socks, half-read storybooks, a half-empty coffee mug, and I realize this is what truth looks like. It's not polished. It's not perfect. It's honest. I learned that the hard way. When someone hides behind lies, you can spend years loving a version of them that doesn't even exist. You give and forgive and stretch yourself and thinner until one day you disappear. But when the truth finally breaks through, painful as it is, it brings you back to yourself. That's what happened to me. Finding out the truth, that my son's DNA didn't match my husband's, felt like the end of everything I believed in. But it wasn't the end. It was the start of something new. A life where I didn't have to guess what was real anymore. I think often about the night I sat with that DNA report in my hands, how my world collapsed in silence, and somehow, in that silence, I also found clarity. The truth stripped everything away, my illusions, my comfort, my marriage, but it also gave me something I'd lost. Myself. If you've ever been betrayed, you know the kind of emptiness I'm talking about. It's not just heartbreak. It's the feeling that your whole story got rewritten without your consent. But here's what I learned. The story isn't over until you write the next chapter yourself. No one else gets to decide how it ends. Michael and I don't talk much anymore. We coordinate around Jacob, exchange polite messages, and keep it peaceful. He's doing better, I think. There's remorse in his tone now, and I've accepted that as his burden, not mine. Sometimes, when I see Jacob running across the yard, I think about biology and choice. How family isn't always about who shares your DNA. It's about who shows up, day after day, even after the lies fall apart. And in that sense, I know Jacob will always have both of us, in our own imperfect ways. But more importantly, he has me. Whole, honest, unbroken. And that's something I never thought I'd find again. There's a certain peace that comes with no longer needing revenge. I used to picture moments of payback, public humiliation, karmic justice, the big dramatic ending you think you deserve. But the real victory? It's waking up without bitterness. It's knowing you can look your child in the eye and say, "We're okay," and actually mean it. I once believed love meant keeping promises at any cost. Now I believe love means keeping yourself at any cost. Some nights, when the house is quiet and Jacob's asleep, I light a candle by the window. It's my little ritual, not for grief anymore, but for gratitude. For truth, for growth, for every hard lesson that turned me into someone stronger. And I whisper a small prayer, not for what I lost, but for what I learned. If you're still listening, and I hope you are, let me tell you the one thing I wish someone had told me earlier. You don't need to have it all figured out to start healing. You just need to stop pretending it didn't hurt. That's where it begins. Healing isn't a clean, pretty process. It's messy. It's crying at the grocery store because you heard a song that used to mean something. It's laughing too loud with your kid because for a split second you forgot the pain. It's the quiet pride of buying yourself new bed sheets because this time, they're yours alone. That's healing. Not forgetting, but forgiving. yourself most of all. If my story reminds you of something you've been through, please know this. You're not weak for loving someone who lied. You're human. You wanted to believe in something good, and that's nothing to be ashamed of. But now, maybe it's time to believe in yourself instead. When I finally let go of the idea of the life I should have had, I made space for the life I do have. Smaller, quieter, but real. And real is enough. Real is everything. So if you're sitting in your car right now, or folding laundry, or lying awake at 2 a.m. listening to my voice, maybe this story isn't just mine anymore. Maybe it's yours too. Because behind every woman who's been lied to or left behind or made to feel small, there's another version of her waiting. Patient, steady, stronger than she knows, ready to rise, ready to stop surviving and start living. That's who I found when the dust settled. And she's never leaving again. Did you like my story? Please like and subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far this story of mine travels. Because maybe, somewhere out there, another woman who thought she was broken will hear it and realize she's not. She's just beginning again. And if there's one thing I've learned through all this, it's that the truth might break your heart, but it will never betray you.